Hey everybody, welcome to Flight Review. My name is Ray. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am here with a very special review episode. I am talking about Sinners, the new Ryan Coogler movie starring Michael B. Jordan and Michael B. Jordan, among others, as well in an absolutely loaded cast. I saw it yesterday and I have got some thoughts. Boy, oh boy, have I got some thoughts about this particular movie. Can't wait to dive into all of it here. But of course, before diving headfirst into my thoughts on this particular film, which will not be spoiler averse, this will be a spoiler filled review, just letting you know, because it's one of those types of movies where it's very difficult to talk about all the layers and the subtext and everything in this film without getting into spoilers. So, just giving you already a forewarning about that. Don't listen to this unless you either A, don't care about spoilers, or B, have already seen the movie. So we can have a full-blown conversation about it. But before diving into all of that, I definitely want to remind everybody listening to this show that, especially on an uncharacteristic day when my shows drop, that this show and my other shows can be found at theflightcast.com or wherever you get your podcast, whether it is Apple Podcasts, whether it's at the Flightcast YouTube page, whether it is on Spotify or Pandora. The Flightcast can be found there or wherever you catch your podcasts from. There's the main Flightcast show, which drops on Mondays. We're going to be talking about this upcoming Monday, the new Fantastic Four trailer, plus the announcements from Star Wars Celebrations, among other things as well. And then there's also Flight Box, which we had been talking about Daredevil Born Again for the last number of weeks, but we're shifting gears and we're going to start talking about Andor Season 2 because that premieres this upcoming Tuesday. So stay tuned for that on Wednesdays. And then on Fridays is when we do our feedback show and what we call Friday Flight. That's when everybody sends in their listener feedback, usually through email, and we go over all of the movies, TV, and other sort of media that you, the audience, wish to speak about. And this special episode of Flight Review is dropping on a Saturday, which that will also happen in a couple of weeks for Thunderbolts. I will be reviewing that film as well. That's also going to drop on Saturdays too, so be on the lookout for that. This show doesn't always happen weekly. It really depends on what movies are coming out during the week. I might make it weekly if I could watch some of these movies weekly. I'm not sure, but we'll see how the schedule goes with respect to that. But all of it's at theflightcast.com or at any of those podcast catchers I mentioned earlier. Also want to take a moment to thank all of the supporters of patreon.com/theflightcast. Thank you so much for your very loyal support. In the next day or two, I will be posting my next Patreon exclusive Flight Review episode, which involves a very important musical figure for which an anniversary is approaching. We're only a couple of days away from it. It's not Easter, but it's a musician that is very near and dear to my heart, one that I grew up with, and this musician made a couple of movies, but there's one in particular that stands out that I have never watched. I've never seen it in all my years on this earth, but I did purchase it last year as part of my library in 4K glorious steelbook form, and I will be watching it for the first time and reviewing it for the first time. So stay tuned for that. I'm debating on whether or not, because the anniversary itself was on Monday, and I'm either going to drop that review either on the Sunday before, which would be on Easter, or would on the actual anniversary itself, which is Monday, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that's when the anniversary drops. And that'll be a Patreon exclusive episode of Flight Review. So if you are a member of patreon.com/theflightcast, if you're a flight officer in particular, you will get access to that particular episode. You'll also have access to all the other bonus content, all the other Flight Review episodes I've done, plus episodes of Flight Speed, Flight Chat, Flight Report, which is the comic review show that I've done in the past. There's actually a lot of content there. There really is. And I'm adding more consistently to it now. So for those of you that are members of patreon.com/theflightcast, thank you so much for your support. Hope that you're enjoying all that bonus content. And if anybody is so inclined, just go ahead and pop on over, sign up to be a flight officer, and you'll get access to all the content and all the extra shows that I post to that site. All right, let's get into it. Originally, about a month or so ago, this movie wasn't on my radar as far as doing a review of it. I mean, it was on my radar. I knew it was coming out. I'd seen trailers. It looked intriguing, but it wasn't one that I wasn't 100% certain I was going to see at the theater. And then some of the chatter and the buzz started to pick up on it. And to be honest with you, I am not that much of a, like I haven't seen a lot of Ryan Coogler's work, right? And granted, he's only got 5 feature films that he's directed, and to date, there's only one of them that I haven't at least seen, like, most of. Like it's weird because I started watching Creed. I didn't finish like the last 10 minutes of Creed. So the next, and it was a while ago. So I've got to go back and rewatch the whole movie to remember all of the context. I remember liking the movie, and I forget why I didn't watch the last 10 minutes. I don't remember what happened at the tail end of that. But aside from that, obviously I've seen Black Panther. I've seen Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. I've reviewed both of those either here or over at Squadcast Media. And I've now seen Sinners. So the only movie of his I haven't seen is Fruitvale Station. So I guess really it's like, all right, well, Ray, you do kind of know Ryan Coogler's work. You've seen damn near all of it. Yeah, I get that. But, I didn't have necessarily the same connection to, like, his influences. And he's not necessarily a filmmaker that has been that much on my radar until now. And, maybe he should have been for a while because, back in the day, some years ago when he was doing events with Ava DuVernay and talking about the culture and black filmmaking and representation matters, he's absolutely like a massive champion of that with respect to his storytelling. And you could see it, obviously. The Black Panther movies, definitely fall under that category. I've heard Fruitvale Station is extremely emotional. That's probably one that now I will review for Patreon. I'll probably do a FLITE review episode of that on Patreon as well in the not too distant future. But yeah, this one, it was on my radar, but I've talked before about how I feel about horror movies and like this kind of change that I've had in my philosophy with horror. So it's like, okay, I might see this, but I might not see it at the theater. And then, yeah, there was buzz that started popping up about it, with respect to the cultural angle and with respect to, when it takes place, the fact that it was a period piece. And it's like, okay, you know what, I am intrigued. And then, it really started the hell site. That's I always call Rotten Tomatoes the hell site because it is the hell site because way too many of us put too much stock and faith into an arbitrarily like calculated is not even like that's being too nice with respect to how a tomato meter score is actually generated because there is no rhyme or reason to it. But when you go to work and your coworkers talking about how it's at 100% and you see that it's at 100% and this is like turning into a point of conversation, it's like, all right, well, I gotta check this out at the theater because now this is turning into a discussion piece. I mean, quite honestly, the bigger like indicator of like the word of mouth and the popularity of this film is the fact that it has an A cinema score. I think it's like the first horror film in a long time, very long time, to get an A cinema score, an R-rated horror movie at that matter. And in fact, I'm reading this on Threads, and I don't know how true this is, but if it is, it's amazing. Apparently, it's the only horror movie in 35 years to get an A cinema score. That is impressive because that, again, is word of mouth, and that's something that actually is measured. That there's a scale for that, and it's used to garner. It's really not meant for, like, it's not about film quality. It's about film popularity. It's about, what the audiences are saying and the news that is traveling about this particular film. And it's very intriguing with respect to that aspect of it. So that to me was more impressive like of a feat than the Rotten Tomatoes thing. But at any rate, I said, all right, I'm going to see this. How are we going to expedite this? How are we going to make this happen? Well, I've gotten into this habit and this really has worked out because of my schedule, the way that, I get out of work at my job at noon. Like I work very early in the morning before the sun even rises and I'm out at noon. And I'll tell you what, the best time to see movies like with minimal crowds where you don't have to deal with like a bunch of morons and ridiculous people is like, during business hours on a weekday. So I went and saw the 12:30 Friday afternoon showing of this movie and it was perfect. I've talked about this before. When I went and saw Deadpool and Wolverine, same deal, perfect. Other films, Marvel and DC related, outstanding because the thing is like if it's a popular enough movie you won't be sitting in a completely empty theater but you will be sitting with enough people that will not completely annoy the crap out of you right when you see the film and yet you're still going to get some reactions and that was definitely the case when I saw Sinners yesterday. Was I'd say there were a good 15, 20 other people in the theater and there were definitely reactions. There was definitely some emotions conveyed throughout the film, but it wasn't too loud. It wasn't overbearing. You know what the worst part of it was? There were some people, and I guess this speaks to complaints about the cell phone generation. There was one or two people in the row ahead of me that at one point, did pull up the cell phone. It's like, okay, what are you not like into the film? And I suspect there are reasons why I think these particular people weren't necessarily into the film as much as I and others were, because there definitely is some cultural impact that hits very differently depending on your cultural perspective in this film. And it clearly didn't hit them the way that it hit me and a number of others in the theater. But that was about it. So, okay, maybe I'm leaning to the right so that glare isn't bugging me. Because it wasn't like I could hear it. It wasn't that. It was just, they didn't turn the damn screen, brightness down. So it's like, okay, bright light here, move over, bright light there, move over. That was it. That was the majority of the irritation, and really, I can curtail that later, like by making certain that I buy my tickets sooner so that I'm sitting center mass, like, which is what I normally do. I normally sit dead center in the back row. Didn't buy it soon enough. Somebody snaked a center back row ticket before I did. So I'm like, all right, well, now I got to make certain I'm 2 seats down from them, because that's my rule of thumb, at least 2 seats down. Especially if it were regular stadium seating, it'd be like 4 or 5 seats, right? But with the recliners, I can do two, because that's more than enough space, right? Especially if they bring a friend, or if they're whatever the situation is. I was otherwise in a good spot to watch this film. And other than, dealing with, maybe some fatigue issues when I get out of work, it is a sweet spot to watch a movie like this, especially one that might have a bit more buzz and have a bit more attention, and a bit bigger of a crowd watching it at night, which I'm not against the crowds. Listen, all the people in the world, more power to you. Go see this movie, right? Everybody go see this movie. But I just don't like crowds. So for me, that's been my ritual for seeing this, and that's how I saw it. And so by the time I was done, I'd seen the movie like at 2:30, 3 o'clock yesterday, right? And probably could have recorded this review then, but had to do the Friday Flight feedback show instead. So at any rate, I saw it yesterday, and probably one of the biggest like compliments that I could pay to the film is that on the way home, I'd gotten a notification like a couple days earlier from my Steelbook Discord, for my Steelbook collecting, that the pre-order link for the 4K Steelbook of Sinners, which does not have a release date yet, was available at like 3 different retailers. And I pre-ordered it on the way home from the movie theater as quickly as I possibly could. Which is a great segue into my high level thoughts for this particular film, which is phenomenal, flawless, absolutely outstanding. Yeah, you heard me say flawless, right? Listen, it's all subjective. People can observe flaws in movie making and storytelling if they want. But for me personally, flawless film, absolutely flawless, and just a masterpiece. Truthfully, like I said, Ryan Coogler has done 5 feature films, and in such an early young career, right? He's been making movies since 2013. This is his 5th feature film, and he may have already made his magnum opus. Seriously, like this is his Malcolm X, right? Like if we're comparing him to other directors, right? Like Spike Lee did Malcolm X, and that was his big magnum opus, right? With respect to that, or Christopher Nolan, what's his magnum opus? It might be Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer might actually be it. I'll understand if people want to say Interstellar. Okay, I'll get that. My personal favorite of his is Inception. Whichever. My point is, this is the best film Ryan Coogler's made to date, and it does so much, and it is such an impressive feat. And probably the most impressive thing about it is that it defies genre classification. I know that it's considered a horror movie. I know that it's considered a period piece, and it is those, but it's a lot else. It's a whole lot else. There are musical elements. I mean, there are massive musical elements in this particular film that definitely puts it in the musical category. Maybe not as a straight up musical, but it can be considered that. There are some comedic elements in it, but it's not necessarily a comedy in that respect, right? There's science fiction elements, there's dramatic elements, there's thriller elements. There's a lot. There's a hell of a lot in this particular film. But I'm gonna tell you the biggest thing, the number one thing that I take away from this. I talk a lot on my shows about the importance of representation matters, right? When I talk about, whether it is black or brown filmmakers, creators, actors, whoever it is, getting center stage, being able to, tell their stories, especially when it's original stories, but even when it's adaptations, right? I talked about how, representation matters is big for me with respect to the comic book shared cinematic universe films, and I've brought up Black Panther obviously as a massive turning point for that. I've also brought up Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, right? I've brought up Blue Beetle. I've even brought up Black Adam, right? Because those are all majorly important, examples of representation matters as far as I'm concerned. And the reason for the importance of that is because these were stories and these were vantage points that largely we as an audience have not gotten a chance to see on the big stage. Maybe we see these done independently, maybe we see them done very low budget, maybe they're crowdsourced, like Indiegogo or Kickstarter or whatever it is, right? Maybe we see them, on BET, maybe we see them on Tubi, right? A lot of these stories and a lot of these filmmakers, a lot of these creatives don't commonly get the big bucks from, Warner Brothers or Disney or whoever else to tell these stories to a wider audience. They don't get the money for the production, they don't get the money for the distribution and the marketing. And so when they do, and when they are this good, that's a big deal. That is a massive deal, right? Because this just shows you what brown and black filmmakers are capable of. This shows you what happens when you have a diversified cast, when you have a cast made up of people who have very unique perspectives on life and history, and when they delve into the research and delve into the history of certain things within a particular culture, and they put it all they put it on display for the world to see with that big budget, right? With that, the Marvel budget. And this isn't a Marvel budget, mind you. It's 90 to 100 million dollars is what the reported budget for this particular film is. But that's still a lot more than Dear White People, right? Or something of a smaller scale in that regard. It's not like so much of this movie's budget went into the casting. There was a lot that they had to do technically with this film. There was a lot that they had to do story-wise, in terms of production with this particular film to get it right and to get the tone going right. And, the money was extremely well spent as far as I'm concerned. This is an absolute masterclass in filmmaking. It's fantastic. It's outstanding. It is innately a Ryan Coogler film. It's now, to me, it is a movie that now makes his films must watch for me. When a new one of his movies is released, it's like, okay, well, gotta go see that, because he's hit for me, right? Out of 5 movies, that's 4 out of 5 movies so far. Because like I said, I didn't finish Creed, but I did like everything that I watched up until that last 10 minutes. I'll rewatch it, but I'll still count it as a film that I enjoyed. But the Black Panther films and now this, that's 4 out of 5, and I'm certain I will enjoy Fruitvale Station, or at least appreciate it. I hear it's a very emotional movie, which is part of the reason why I didn't go see it. Part of the reason why I haven't seen it, because I've heard how emotional that movie is, and I don't necessarily like when it comes to like those types of films, especially any film, any story that has to do with race relations or anything that has to do with, that type of culture. Like sometimes it can be difficult. Like I got to be in a mood to watch a movie like that, right? I've said this before, and I've talked with my mother about this, and my mom, I appreciate that my mom and I have a shared opinion on this, because she's never seen The Color Purple, and neither have I. And there are a lot of people out there that would want to take away our black cards for that. And, I'll flip them off and be like, yeah, you can get that mess out of here. But the reason for that is because, those types of movies, especially any that like, showcase black pain, historically speaking, or any type of struggle, you got to be in the mode to watch those types of movies. It's not like I can have a good day at work and then just come home and be like, hey, let me throw in Roots. I haven't felt the pain of of slavery and racism and Jim Crow enough. Let me go ahead and tap into that particular area. No, you just can't throw those movies in and be like, hey, whatever. It's also why I still haven't seen 12 Years a Slave. I will watch it eventually at some point. But that's why I've been reluctant to see these types of films. And Sinners definitely look different. And one of the reasons that Sinners looks different is because it's also a film that, for me, has personal significance. Not, I mean, the cultural stuff that I definitely want to get into is absolutely there and extremely important. But the bigger thing for me personally that this film does with respect to representation matters is it proves something that I have felt very strongly about for a long time. And that is the idea of fantasy and science fiction being done in black cinema. Far too often I've heard the excuse from people that, oh, the studios don't think that it's bankable. The studios don't think that it sells. And it's like they pass over the idea of a black directed science fiction film, or a black led, like a black showrunner doing a science fiction show, or any of these types of fantasy stories. And what really kind of hit me with that was however many years ago, what was it, 2020, when I watched Lovecraft Country. Lovecraft Country, of course, Misha Green, HBO series. And there are a lot of similarities. There's a lot of shared DNA between what that show did and what Sinners does. But I remember the biggest thing coming out of me watching that show, and I reviewed it here because that was the show that I watched when I was too nervous to watch the results of the 2020 election during work from home. I remember the biggest takeaway I took from Lovecraft Country was finally a show that is full magic and full fantasy and full like sci-fi elements that stars and predominantly focuses on black people. Like that type of experience. And it's like, where has this been my whole life? Like, how come we have not seen, like, we see adaptations of Philip K. Dick stories and William Gibson and Isaac Asimov, right? The Foundation is a story, or is one of Asimov's, novel series that has been adapted for a show on Apple TV Plus. I still haven't watched it. It's on my list, my long list of stuff to get caught up on just on Apple TV Plus. Those adaptations are great, right? Or like Total Recall, Minority Report, Blade Runner, right? All the stuff from these critically acclaimed science fiction writers that have been adapted for movies and television for decades. And yet, where's the Octavia Butler? Where is the Samuel Delaney? Where are the adaptations of science fiction stories from black authors? You know how much work Octavia Butler put out there in her career? I mean, the Patternus series, Xenogenesis, Parable, and it took until just a couple of years ago before Netflix adapted Kindred for like one of their series, right? Like it's been that long. And again, I've lost count how many Philip K. Dick adaptations there are, and Asimov, and Ray Bradbury, right? There was even a Ray Bradbury show, and Alfred Hitchcock show and all that. And it's like, okay, look, I know that there are black authors, I know that there are black writers that can tell these stories. I know they can do sci-fi as a genre. How is it that they can do every other genre except this? They can do dramas, they can do comedies, they can do action movies, they can't do science fiction? They can't do fantasy? That's bullshit. That's always like bothered me. That the best that I could do, the best that I could see as far as black representation in science fiction were characters in Star Trek. And I love them all. I love Lieutenant Uhura. I love Lieutenant Commander Geordi LaForge. I love Captain Benjamin Sisko. And of course, I love Captain Michael Burnham, right? I love all of those characters. But we never had anything that was just fully like, black science fiction, black fantasy. It's just been few and far between, and that's been a massive misstep. That's been a massive misfire, in my opinion, from Hollywood, because I feel like there's a lot of those stories that could and should be told by those authors and by those writers that need to see the light of day. And so that's, to me, personally, what Sinners does. This is a fantasy story, a black fantasy story that centers around it's a period piece about black history that uses vampires as a vehicle, right, as a vessel to tell this particular story and to expose and bring light to all the subtext and all the different layers of the black experience over the last 100 years and even beyond that. And it's told in such a way, and it is crafted in such a way that speaks to the black experience, but also respects all the rules of standard vampire fantasy stuff. And I'll talk more about that in the writing portion of this. But that was the biggest thing to me, is like, finally, these types of movies are few and far between, and I want to see more of these stories told. I want to see more of this stuff adapted. And that's personally why I want Sinners to do well in the box office, is because I'm tired of the narrative that black science fiction doesn't sell, that black fantasy doesn't sell, right? This isn't, this is more fantasy than science fiction, but just the idea of black creators, whether directors, writers, actors, this type of story absolutely can and does sell and should sell and should be available to the general audience more than it has been allowed to, right? I mean, look at Black Panther. Black Panther definitely counts as black science fiction. It is, right? Anything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is science fiction, right? I know that we look at superheroes as its own genre, but it's science fiction, okay? Like, especially when you talk about the tech that the Wakandans had, right? Coogler understands this. He knows this, and he was able to incorporate all of that into all the subtext and everything else with respect to how he built the Wakandans and the story that he crafted for both of those films, right? And what he's, what we hear he's going to do for the third film. And so he is a filmmaker that understands that. And Ava DuVernay is another one. I mentioned her earlier. I'm still, miffed that nothing came of her New Gods idea, because I did want that to actually happen. I wanted to see what she'd do with Highfather. I wanted to see what she'd do with Darkseid. I really wanted to see what she'd do with Big Barda, because that's like her favorite superhero. But these are black creatives that, black people watch science fiction. Black people are fans of science fiction. Black people write science fiction and fantasy stories. They're out there for the taking and for the consumption of the general audience. And I wish the studios understood that far more than they have, far more than they really haven't in the last 40 plus years. And so that to me is the biggest thing personally that Sinners is to me, is it brings that to light. In the midst of all the other incredible stuff that it does, it really brings that to light, and I am eternally grateful for it being able to do that. I used the word flawless to describe this movie earlier, and quite honestly, there is no bigger aspect of this film that word applies to than its cast. This is a 100% flawless cast. There is not a weak link in this entire cast for Sinners. Everyone is on point. Everybody is bringing their A game, and it starts with Michael B. Jordan, because this dude had to play himself, like his own character Smoke, and his brother Stack. That is insane. And never mind the technical aspects of this, right? And I watched an interview earlier today where he talked about how difficult it was. He said they called them twin days. Those were the more difficult days on set for him and the actors, because there were times when he's talking to a body double. There's times when he's talking to nobody at all, and he's got to make certain that he's on his marks and he's not stepping over other people's lines, or he's not stepping in the wrong place on the camera. He's got to keep the balance as best as he can as an actor while still doing his job as a character. And he's playing two different characters, because the brothers that he plays in this film, like, they come from the same place and they are twins, but they are different. They are very different characters. Elijah Smoke Moore is not the same as Elias Stack Moore, right? Like, and he's got to be able, it's more than just the physical look in terms of like how differently they're dressed and how differently they appear to others, but also in how differently the portrayal has to be. Like, there has to be a difference. You can't look at them and go, oh, well, he's just playing the same dude in two different ways. No, Smoke is different than Stack. They're not the same, right? They have similar ideas, and they are both very protective of each other, but they are not exactly the same characters. And there's got to be the little nuances and the little parts of Michael B. Jordan's performance that has to distinguish between one brother or the other, and he's got to know when to turn one on and the other off, and vice versa, throughout the entirety of this production. And it is insane the work that he does with respect to that, and the idea that you watch this movie and you're seeing two different people being played by one actor all the time, like for the entirety of the film. It's like, this is an absolute tour de force. It is utterly fantastic, and it showcases the ability, the depth of Michael B. Jordan's ability for anybody that wasn't aware of it to this point, because he's assembled quite a list, if you will. I had a slight disagreement with a coworker because they were making a comparison to his filmography and said that he should be the Denzel Washington of this generation, but they didn't like the choices that he had made with his films. Well, if you look at Michael B. Jordan's film career, I mean, okay, so he was in Red Tails. That's the George Lucas World War II, from the point of view of the Tuskegee Airmen film that also featured David Oyelowo among a few others. Oh, and Neo was also in that as well, and also Cuba Gooding Jr. So he was in that. He's in Chronicle. He's in, yes, Fan Four Stick. He was in that the same year that he was in Creed. Okay, I mentioned Fruitvale Station. He was in an HBO adaptation of Fahrenheit 451. He's in Kin. He's done sequels to Creed. He's in Just Mercy. Okay, so his career hasn't gone in the same direction as Denzel, but why should it? Filmmaking is very different now than it was when Denzel Washington started, and the types of films that Michael B. Jordan does, I do think that it speaks to the variety within his career in terms of of the roles that he's playing. And this is a different role for him to play this type of character in a period piece like this, a fantasy period piece like this. And to me, I am not nearly as critical of his career to this point because he is who he is as far as an actor. And the question is, how well does he play these roles? How strong of a character does he play? And look, he's one of the better villains in the MCU as Killmonger. That's without question, no doubt about it. And then, with respect to Creed and some of the other stuff he's done, like I said, I haven't seen Fruitvale Station, but he's allowed to have a wide variety of what he does in his career. And if this ends up being, one of the strongest roles that he, has in his repertoire, right, as he approaches 40, he's 38. He is exactly the same age as my sister Rachel because they have exactly the same birthday. They were both born on the exact same day in the exact same year, a fact that she is eternally delighted over. But yeah, no, he was fantastic. He was beyond fantastic. He was absolutely outstanding. And the great part about it, though, is that this isn't a case where, oh, he carried the film. Oh, no. He has an incredible amount of support. And quite honestly, I'll go to the newcomer here immediately, Miles Caton, who plays Sammy, Preacher Boy Moore, who is his cousin, right? I think cousin, nephew, nephew, that's right, because his father was the same, the brother of Smoke and Stack's father, right? And so he's the young one, and this is his acting debut. He has not done anything beforehand. This young blood is new to the acting scene, and this is his first feature film, and I mean he nailed that role. He absolutely, as far as like the care and the study that he did in terms of learning blues music, how to play the guitar, how to sing, how to do different performances, the work that he did musically for his character, outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. You wouldn't buy that this kid doesn't know how to do this, that this kid isn't tapping into the blues whenever he picks up that guitar, whenever he sings. It's absolutely on display, and he does an utterly phenomenal job. And this is his opening salvo, right? This is the beginning of his career in Hollywood, and what a great set piece. I mean, because in many ways, he is the driving force of this film. His character is, kind of the one that, like he's caught in the middle of it, but he's the one that you technically see first, and he's the one that you end on, really, truthfully. Like everything is kind of seen through his eyes. I mean, you get different perspectives, right? This isn't a movie that only follows him, but he is kind of like the primary protagonist throughout all of it as far as what is happening around him in this world to everybody that's going on. And he does an outstanding job. I mean, for a newcomer, for a brand new actor, you could not ask for a debut stronger than this from a cat like that, no doubt. Um, I had to talk about him before I talk about the, I don't want to say the surprise. Actually, there was a surprise with this. Haley Steinfeld. Now, Haley Steinfeld is another actress that I have like limited exposure to like the work that she's done because the first thing I saw her in was True Grit, the Coen brothers adaptation of True Grit, with her and Jeff Bridges and Matt Damon, which was good. It was definitely really good. But outside of that, my rest of the, like I haven't seen Bumblebee yet. That's on the catch up list. But I have seen Hawkeye, as I famously talked about on Flightbox. I saw everything but the last episode of that show, so I'm gonna fully rewatch it at some point here in the not too distant future, along with everything else I'm gonna watch in the not too distant future. But I've seen Hawkeye, and obviously she plays Gwen Stacy, aka Spider Woman, in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse and Into the Spider-Verse. So I've seen those, right? But I don't have a whole lot of like I haven't seen Dickinson or any of the other stuff that she's done outside of that. So, her abilities as an actor, like I don't have a whole lot of experience with it. But I tell you what, here, like I thought it was intriguing just seeing her character in the trailers. I'm like, okay, I have an idea of exactly what this character is going to be. And then I get into the movie and I'm like, no, that's not what I thought this character was going to be at all. It is outstanding what she does in this film. And I tell you what, that first hour, I definitely had that thought. I'm like, you know what? Is Haley Steinfeld invited to the cookout? For people who know what that means, if you know, you know. But I had that thought. And I didn't realize that, her real life heritage was placed into her character in this film. The character that she plays in this film, Mary, is 1/8 black because her grandfather had some black in him. And she, in real life, is the same way. She absolutely is 1/8 black. And you ever have one of those cases, just being real about this, you ever have one of those cases where you look at an actor or you look at somebody in the public eye and you think, well, okay, they're this, but they're not totally that, right? Like it, this is always a touchy subject to talk about because when you can't always say that to people, especially now because you don't want to offend anybody, and of course you don't want to be offensive, but you're still curious as a human being, right? You're not going to insult people. You're not just going to blatantly say, like the person asked me at the U-Scan many years, excuse me, what are you? No, you're not going to go up to Haley Steinfeld and ask her what she is. That's incredibly insulting. But in the back of your mind, you're going to be curious with respect to that. And to hear the actual like legacy and lineage of her parentage actually being represented in this film, it was phenomenal, and it definitely played a part in how she played this role and how she was able to tap into whatever experiences she's had in her life to play this role as well as she did. Throughout the different turns that her character takes, she's aces. She's fantastic. She is absolutely one of the strengths of this film. But this film has a ton of strengths. The unsung hero, actually, there's two unsung heroes for this particular film. Two performances that absolutely they don't carry the movie, but man, do they support this movie with a rock solid foundation. The first one is Wunmi Masaku as Annie, and I have been a fan of hers since she testified against Superman in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition, of course. And she's also one of the reasons that it pisses me off what Warner Brothers did with respect to the theatrical and the Ultimate Edition, because she's in the Ultimate Edition way more, right? Like, you only see her in one scene in the theatrical edition. In the Ultimate Edition, you find out that she's been paid off by Lex Luthor. She went to Senator Finch to go tell her the truth, and then KG Beast threw her in front of a train before she could actually reveal what was going on, right? Like, she did that really well. And I'm like, wait a minute. And I read this story about how, Zack Snyder and Holly Hunter really made her feel welcome on the set. And I'm like, how do you do that? How do you just cut all that out of a person's performance, with respect to what was actually in the film, right? And she did that way before she played Hunter 15 in the first season of Loki, right? I think I haven't seen season 2 of Loki, so I assume she's in the second season. I don't know. But she's definitely in Deadpool and Wolverine. And of course, before that, to me, the role that really turned my head with her performance, it was when she played Ruby in Lovecraft Country, which I mentioned before. And she was phenomenal in that show. And I feel like she's taken what she learned out of that role and she's brought it into this role in Sinners. She is the spiritual glue, and I mean that literally. She is the spiritual and mystical glue of this film. She is that character. In fantasy films, there is an expositional character that explains the magic and shit that is going on, right? Explains how, okay, this is how these rules work, and these are how these people work, and that's who this is, that's who that is. She's the one with the knowledge. She's the one informing and educating everybody. Hey, these are vampires. This is how this works. That's how that works, right? And that particular character in these stories has to be the most soulful, arguably, right? That's got to be the one that's in touch with the ground and the earth and the spirits and everything with respect to that, right? And she does such an outstanding job of that in this movie. And hopefully, I mean, look, she's been around for a long time, and she's Nigerian born British, which means she has a ton of BBC credits and a ton of stuff that she's done even outside of what we've seen her in. Like I said, first thing I saw her in, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. But she's also been in, and then Deadpool and Wolverine, and like I said, Lovecraft Country. I feel like those and this are like the big points of where we've seen her. But she's been in Law and Order UK. She's been in like Moses Jones, Never Better. Like I said, a ton of British stuff. Like, she's got well over a decade's worth, actually almost 2 full decades worth of work as an actor in Hollywood. And hopefully now this is one of those where kind of like Giancarlo Esposito, or even Robert Downey Jr., where it's like, okay, you know what? We see you now. Let's get you some bigger work. Let's get you a lead role somewhere, Wunmi Masaku, because she absolutely deserves one. She is phenomenal in this film. And the other one who really supports this film incredibly well along with her, Delroy Lindo as Delta Slim. He is amazing. And you know what? I've known for years how amazing of an actor he was. Last thing I saw him in that he absolutely blew me away in was The Five Bloods, the Spike Lee film that he did about the Vietnam veterans, one of Chadwick Boseman's last movies that was done for Netflix. Delroy Lindo was outstanding in that movie, and here, he lends himself as like an elder character. Delta Slim is an elder character that's been through the ringer, has been through a lot of the hardships and a lot of the heartbreak and a lot of the tortured bullshit that black people went through back in the Jim Crow era and before. And he's the storyteller. He's the one that, he's not always there, because he loves to drink and he just loves to, live life and has that energy, but he's got the memories, right? And it's like the soul of the blues goes through him, right? He's the piano player and he's the one that like kind of, he's going to be one of the translators, if you will, right? He's got a lot of pain and his soul is as heavy as it weighs as heavy as it could possibly weigh on a human being that could survive it, but he's going to survive it because he does, believe in his people and he is, a help when necessary and, does try to help process that pain with everybody throughout, right? And he does such an amazing job in this film, and he's an amazing like supporting actor in a number of things. He's been aces for a long time, and he's somebody that, whether he's gotten like his big flowers or not, every once in a while he'll pop up in something and people are like, man, how good was he in this? How good was he in that? And here's another one where he's like, how damn good was he in this movie? My goodness, outstanding, right? And the rest of the supporting cast, I mean, those are the big hitters that I've mentioned so far. The rest of the supporting cast, I had a moment where I was looking at the actress that plays Pearline, Jamie Lawson, and I'm like, wait a minute, this face, the first half of this movie, I'm like, I know that face, I know that face, I know her from somewhere. Who is she? What has she been in? Whatever she's been in, it's comic book related. What is it? And it finally hit me halfway through the movie. This is Mayor Bella Real, the one who won the election in the Batman. Yes, that's what I saw her from. She's the mayor, right? Together we can learn to believe in Gotham again. Yes, her. Absolutely. And she's playing a very different role here, but it is one of those cases where when I saw her in the Batman, I'm like, okay, let's see her in some more things. Perfect. Absolutely. She was fantastic in this film. I also have to give some flowers to Lee Jun Lee, the actor who played Grace Chow, and also what's his name? He doesn't have a listing here, but his name, he's listed as Yao. Like there's an Asian couple in the movie that own a store, a general store, like in the local town, and they're the ones that help Smoke and Stack put together the juke joint, and they were awesome. And that was another part of the representation matters that I definitely want to get into when I talk about the writing of this film in just a little bit here, that I really appreciated in terms of multiple minorities being represented at the same time in this fantasy story, right? In this fantasy period piece. But they were awesome. Jack O'Connell, who plays the lead vampire Remick, I don't have any personal, at least I don't think I do. If I go through his filmography, have I seen anything that he's been in? I'm not seeing anything familiar as far as film. Nope, have not seen any of these because I haven't seen 28 Years Later. Apparently he's in. Did that come out already? No, I don't think it is. It has not come out yet. But I haven't seen any of his movies. And as far as his shows, let's see, Doctors, Waterloo Road, Wire in the Blood, The Runaway. Nope, have not seen any of this. So this is my introduction to Jack O'Connell. And as far as villains go, as far as villainous vampires go, outstanding. Very well done, right? Outstanding antagonist slash villain with respect to this, because there are villains and antagonists within this story. He's definitely like the villain, or a villain, and there's multiple villains in this particular film. But yeah, he was really, really good, and there's even some representation matter stuff that goes into his history with him being Irish, or rather his father being Irish, that absolutely plays into this and was incorporated incredibly well into the film. So he's awesome, right? Like there is not a weak link here, right? Omar Benson Miller, Cornbread. Now, what have I seen him in? Come on, I know I've seen him in a number of things, but probably not as much as I would think. That's right. He was Glenn's cousin in Transformers. He's the one that went through the glass and went and what did he land in the pool, or no? He went through the glass and they tackled him. I think he landed in the pool, something like that. But he was in that Miracle at St. Anna. No, I have not seen Miracle at St. Anna. Is there anything else he's done that I've actually seen? No, sadly not. Although he was the voice of Raph in Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 2022, which that's animated. Nope, haven't seen that. Wow. This is embarrassing. I really have not seen anything else that he's been in, but he was great. He was awesome. Like, again, there has not been a single. Yeah, I know he was in 8 Mile before somebody says that. I haven't seen 8 Mile. That's on the list. Yeah, I know. I get it. Whatever. This cast doesn't have a single weak link. Everybody absolutely brought their A game. Everybody was 1000% on point, and everybody that I mentioned, made the big contributions to it, and then everybody else absolutely supported that. I mean, it just absolutely utterly fantastic. And like I said earlier, flawless. This is a flawless cast. So when it comes to the brilliance of just how well written Sinners is, I mean, it is so incredibly layered. And the first thing that popped into my head with respect to how well layered this film is I thought about when I saw Nope. What was it, the last year or the year before last, whenever that movie came out. I remember that I felt stupid. I felt silly because there was a lot of subtext and there were a lot of layers when I first watched that movie that I didn't catch. And it wasn't until I read a piece in the Hollywood Reporter by Richard Newby, who used to be a mutual of mine back over in the old days of Twitter. He laid it all out in the article, and I just felt like, how did I miss all this? How did I not catch this? How was this subtext not there, especially me being a minority myself? I felt like I should have caught it, and I was hard on myself for not catching it in that particular film. And this time, like watching this movie, was like, no, I'm pretty sure I know what this is. I'm pretty sure I get a lot of the layers that are in here, and maybe I don't get all of them, but I've seen like a bunch of different perspectives on this film and the storytelling with respect to the messages and the themes from other people that have watched it, and a lot of them have come to the same conclusions that I came to, and then there was some other stuff that I learned. I was like, oh, you know what? That's a good point. Like all the history, the Delta blues history, and all the music stuff, I wasn't like aware of. Like the idea, like somebody mentioned on Threads about how the idea that Irish jig music and like the blues are like the predecessor. They're like the building blocks of modern country music, of like the country genre. Like that's what country music comes from. And the fact that they're both brought together in this film is, not by accident in that regard. But honestly, the bigger themes to me, the stuff that stuck out to me, the one thing that really stuck out to me was the idea of using the vampire motif, right? Using the vampire subject as a metaphor for how we feel about race relations. There's a point in the movie, because what is the whole point of this movie? The whole point of this movie is that Stack and Smoke they bought this this old sawmill to open a juke joint for everybody in town, right? And they're doing all this in the span of a day, right? And so the idea is, they want some freedom. They want a piece of they want a business of their own, black owned, black controlled, and a place for black people to come and have fun, relax, dance, sing, do whatever, have some drinks, do whatever they're gonna do, right? Like that's the whole point of this, and they're gonna build it, like you said, for us, by us. He says that at one point in the movie, and so the idea of black entrepreneurship and like searching for that freedom and like building something that was innately theirs, right? Not asking permission, but just doing something that they were going to do, building something of their own from the ground up, a business that they were going to operate and control for their own people, for our own people. Like that's the bulk of this. That's the center, the core of this story, and that's what you get in that first hour is you see exactly like it's a real story, right? And this is something that I've talked about with horror movies. Like if I'm gonna watch a horror movie, I need it to have plot, I need it to have character development, I need it to have substance, and there is a whole lot of substance with respect to the idea that they're doing this during the Jim Crow era, the racism that they're encountering, that where they have to set it, what they have to do, how they have to go about it, the perceptions that they have, and what is going on with each of these characters with respect to putting this juke joint together. Smoke and Stack have been through some stuff. They got a reputation coming back home, and it's not all rosy in that regard, right? Like the Sammy, has been encouraged by his father, who is a preacher, to, put away the music and don't run off to the juke joint. Don't do this with them. I want you to come, and help me give my sermon the next day, that type of deal, right? But he wants to be a musician. It's what he wants to do. He wants to tap into that music. And that's the other big theme within this particular film, is a celebration of black culture and a celebration of musical culture. There is a scene, and I love how on threads and on social media, people are just referring to it as that scene, and everybody knows what they're talking about. But for people who don't, it's the scene in the juke joint where we are treated to a masterful display of centuries, or decades rather, of, no, actually really is centuries, right? Because he goes all the way back to African culture, then he goes all the way into the future, right? Into our culture and even beyond, where he shows the power of music in the black community and how vibrant it is and how strong it is and how ingrained it is in our culture. And it is the most phenomenal scene in the film, as far as I'm concerned. And many people have said this, and I 1000% agree. And it's in that first hour, before things turn, before everything, before it gets into the vampire movie. And it's funny that the movie has this turn, because I also liken that to From Dusk Till Dawn. If people have seen that movie by Robert Rodriguez, written by Quentin Tarantino, that is a movie that has a very similar turn. Now, the first hour is very different. It's not any type of cultural representation or diaspora or anything like that. It's violent. It's a very different type of movie. And then halfway through, Salma Hayek turns into a leathery vampire, and then it turns into a vampire survival horror flick, horror action flick for the rest of it. And in this case, it's a very similar turn here, but all that substance is still there. All of what we were looking at and all the themes and the depth, like, continue on. The vampires are a metaphor, and the metaphor that they represent a couple of things. And the one that I caught immediately, like, in the theater, was, there's a point where Remick, they're following the conventions of vampirism, where they have to be invited in, and that's all they want. They want to be invited into the juke joint so they can turn everybody, kill everybody in that regard, right? And part of Remick's pitch to Smoke and everybody still in the juke joint is how bigoted the other white people are. And he warns them, listen, the dude that sold you the sawmill, he's coming back tomorrow morning with his buddies to kill all of you. They're going to slaughter every last one of you, right? So, and we went ahead, like, the couple that he found, that were related to that dude, like, you could see the clan robes in the back, right? They were going to be part of that lynch mob, essentially, that was going to take them all out. And he's saying, hey, listen, I can give you the power to live forever and be stronger than them and be impervious to their bullets, and you can take them out and we can deal with all of them. I just want your music. Like, I just want Sammy Boy's music, and I want the talent, right? You give that to me, and we will make you stronger than any of these bigots. And, I thought that was intriguing when I saw that in the theater, because, say you were a black person that was dealing with all of the Jim Crow era segregationist bullshit, and you were offered the chance to be stronger than any racist ass Klan member, or, and anybody else, that any white supremacist in that era, right? You wouldn't have to suffer anymore. You could, make them bend to you. They would be, there's nothing that they could do to you to take you out. You would be stronger than them. Their racism and their words would be impervious to you. That is appealing, isn't it? It could be appealing to a number of black people. And that's what we see happen to Stack, and that's what we see happen to a number of characters, is like, you know what, I'm tired of feeling this way. I'm tired of everything being a struggle. I'm tired of life being a constant struggle and a matter of life and death, just to live, just to exist. Yeah, I'm going to take this offer, right? And so that was the part that I thought was intriguing, that I caught in the theater. And then later on, it's like, okay, well, what does that truly represent? Well, it represents the idea, not necessarily of selling out, but maybe it kind of is the idea of selling out. The idea of being enamored with the fame and being enamored with everything that, white culture historically has had, or that white people have historically had, and just, leaning into that and immersing yourself in that. And that is what insulates you from the racism. That is what insulates you from the struggle, because you just become part of their world, but you basically sell your soul to do it. You're not yourself anymore. You're now one of them. You're now part of this group that gets away from your roots, gets away from what you were originally as a human being, and you have now become this. In with respect to that culture, right? You put aside the blues, you put aside all the musical, the background that you had, the emotional, what you went through with respect to your perspective, culturally speaking, in favor of assimilation, in favor of being part of the bigger group, so that they won't, that you'll be one of the good ones. I've been told this, right? Because of how I speak and because of, how I was raised. It's sad that in this day and age there are people that still think a black man that, has been raised by two college graduates and speaks English extremely well is like, oh well, he's one of the good ones. He's one of the black people that we like. That's what the metaphor is. That's absolutely what the metaphor is, and that's not something that you'd get unless you were part of that cultural experience. And Sinners, by by far, is one of the strong examples of a film that is gonna hit you differently if you're black. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've said this before. Any white person that watches Black Panther or any of these types of films and doesn't it doesn't if it doesn't hit you the same way as a white person as it would me, there's nothing wrong with that because you're not at fault and you're not lesser. There's nothing lesser about your experience. It's just different. You didn't grow up the way we did. You don't have the same cultural experiences. And I didn't grow up tough or poor or anything like that. I had a very fortunate childhood, but there's still parts of the black experience that I absolutely have and do experience, right? In my life, I have a different perspective in that regard. But somebody that is from the South, somebody that, knows even more about the Jim Crow era than I do, they're the ones that are crying in the theaters. They're the ones that this is hitting emotionally on so many levels. I mean, it hits me emotional on enough levels being the black man that I am. There are others that are going to connect to this even further with respect to that and understand all these themes, whether it's the musical inclination, the roots of the struggle, and the idea that you can tell a story like this and not emphasize the pain. Right? There's a point where where Delroy Lindo's character he's talking about and Delta Slim, he's telling a story about as they're riding to the juke joint site. He's telling a story about about how one of his boys was lynched, how one of his friends was lynched, right? And somebody pointed out how there's a point in the movie where, like, as he's telling that story, that's when he starts rhythmically, tapping on his knee to like beat down the memory, beat down the horrible memory, and it turns into the beat for a song that Sammy ends up playing they end up singing to in the car, right? And that's like the essence of it, right? That's where the music comes from. That's the soul of it, right? There's symbolism even in something relatively as innocuous as that, although that scene was very powerful in terms of the story that he told and how descriptive he was of it, because we all know somebody that has a story like that. And black people in black culture, we know somebody that has a story like that, or we have a story like that, right? And sadly, you can even find stories similar to that, not from the Jim Crow era, but from the present era, right? There's still horrible shit going on right now with respect to how black culture is treated. But there's appropriation themes in this film. There's togetherness and community. There's a big community theme, right? Because again, for that first hour, and this is kind of where, like, if I'm referencing other movies, this is stuff that I'm picking out that I like follow. I talked about before, like I've talked about the Jurassic movies and about how in Jurassic World, the first Jurassic World film, I said, and I continue to say this, I said, it was cool to see the park actually exist and run for an hour, right? Because, like, the first three movies is like, we're trying to get the park off the ground and it's not working. And now we're trying to do it here and bring it to San Diego. That's not working. And then a kid gets lost on an island, another island where they're all at. That's not working, right? For three movies, we never saw the park work. And then for the first hour of Jurassic World, we saw the park actually work. And we knew it was going to fail. We knew something was going to go wrong, but at least for that hour, the park was awesome. The park was actually working. And on a deeper, more cultural level, it's the same thing here in Sinners. For that first hour, you saw that sense of community, like, at an all-time high. You saw how it works. You saw how it's supposed to go. You saw exactly how strong it's supposed to be. And this is where I can bring, the other stuff with the writing in terms of the character development in here, because Mary, Haley Steinfeld's character, right, when you find out that she is part black, when you find out, when some of the scenes that she has with Michael B. Jordan, right? And, because there's pain that she experiences because she wanted to live her life with Stack. She wanted to be with Stack. She didn't want anybody but Stack. She even tells him, I didn't want to be white. She literally says that in the film, like, I never wanted to be white. I wanted to be with you. I wanted to be part of your life. And he tells her that he wanted to keep her safe because at that point in time there was no way that they would have accepted a white woman and a black man. And there's at least there's once or twice in this movie where she just is in tears as a result of that. And that's the strength of her acting, and that's her tapping into her own experience. Imagine being told that. Imagine being told by somebody that you love, it's like, listen, I want to be with you, but I can't be with you because they'll kill you. They'll kill us. Like this will not be. We don't live in a world that is accepting of this, right? And look, there are plenty of minority groups, even beyond black and white people, that are experiencing that shit now, right now, especially in this particular climate that we live in the United States, or even around the world and in different parts of the world as well, right? That's very real, it's very painful, it's very heartbreaking, it's very gut wrenching. And the way that they play it here is incredibly powerful, and it just goes into all that depth. I mean, there is so much amazing. I mean, the whole film is amazing. Even when you get into the vampire stuff, and you, like I said, the part where they're dancing the Irish jig, and those that have gone over, if you will, right? There's allegories about being careful who you let into your house, right? And I've seen some people really take that a little bit far, I think, and act like, well, Ryan Coogler's telling us don't let everybody in your house, and I don't think he's saying that. I think it's way more nuanced than that. You just have to be kind of on guard, and still, understand that there's still individualism even in the people that you're trying to save, as a group in that regard. But it's also how the group works. It wasn't like it was all just a matter of complete panic, right? I mean, there was some strong emotions when the whole vampire stuff pops up, but everybody was still, as best as they could, trying to keep their head and their wits about them. There's a scene in the movie that reminded me of The Thing, because they needed to know that everybody wasn't a vampire, and so Annie has everybody eat garlic cloves. And of course, Pearline, she does the thing where she's like, "This is ridiculous," because she clearly does not like garlic, and it's to the point where you know, Smoke actually points the gun at her. Is like, no, I didn't do it. We need to know that you're not a vampire. And apparently, I've heard people that said that in like the theater, there have been people yelling, "Girl, you better eat that garlic." Just like basically getting into it, like, "Hey, we need to know, like, are you one of us or are you one of them?" type of deal, right? And so she reluctantly does it, but it happens, and then there's even the part, the kind of the fake out when Delta Slim does it, and it looks like he's, getting sick, but he's just like, no, I drank too much. I'm okay, right? It's all good. I'm all right. Just even one of those types of scenes, like this incorporated a lot of stuff. And I mean, Coogler just so ingenious the way that he incorporates so many different aspects from like other stories and other types of stories. I mean, what have I mentioned? I've mentioned Jurassic World. I've mentioned The Thing, right? I'm mentioning other science fiction. I'm mentioning other fantasy stories that he's incorporated aspects and elements of into this story. And this is what I'm talking about with respect to allowing black creatives to tell a story like this, to tell an enriching story like this from this particular perspective. There is an audience for it, and Hollywood needs to absolutely understand that, because when it is this strong, when it conveys the message this powerful, it must be like heralded. It has to be like, put on center stage. This is not something that could, make its mark on. You can't leave this on Tubi or only on BET. This has got to be on the big stage, right? This has got to be Warner Brothers. This has got to be one of the big studios that does this, right? That's what this has to be in order to reach the masses and in order to be able to tell our stories, cultural stories from this perspective. And there's so many other layers with respect to this. I could spend another hour like just going through what people have uncovered on on threads and on social media. To me, I love the ending. I really love the ending, because there was a point where after the vampires had been dispatched, I had completely forgotten about the lynch mob that was coming to shoot them all up. So he's sitting on that trunk, and I'm like, what is in that trunk? They teased the trunk earlier, and Mary's like, you don't need what's in that trunk. And it's like, okay, what's the deal with the trunk? Okay. And when you find out that that trunk is, full of Tommy guns, and he's basically he has sent Sammy away, after, all the chaos, right? Go home, go preach that sermon with your father, right? Because I'm gonna stay back here and I'm gonna tear into every last one of these racists. And sure enough, the racists emerge and they look as stereotypically racist as you could possibly think, and he takes them all out, and that's just extremely satisfying. And then, because Annie had died earlier, and they're going through their own stuff with the child that they lost in childbirth, and he's reunited with her because he's fatally wounded, and so the family is together again on the other side, right? And just that spiritual part of it as well, right? And that even evoked a little bit of Black Panther stuff as well, although the way they did it here was far more ethereal and far more poetic in that regard. No, I just really, really well done. And there is one other aspect that I just remembered that I definitely want to mention, because I talked about how I loved that you had the Asian presence in this film. The other presence, the other minority that was in this film that I loved, that we didn't get to see a ton of, but I just love that they existed and that they're there. The vampire hunters from the Choctaw Native American tribe, right? The whole point is that Remick was being hunted by them. The Native Americans, the Choctaw, were after his ass. And that's what he was fleeing from them. So we're talking about, and when they show up at the door, when they show up, I mean, they're like the feds, man. They're like Van Helsing. They're like, yeah, we're here, right? Is he in there with you? And then basically they just like, all right, well, that's on you. We'll leave you alone. But they hunt these guys like the Native Americans are the vampire hunters, right? The established vampire hunters on horseback, and they're all badass. It's like, I would have loved to have seen more of them. I've read some people claim that uh, Coogler wants to turn this into a franchise, and if so, I want to see more of them. I absolutely want to see more of the Choctaw vampire hunters. That would be amazing. That was just a little part where it's like, hey, you know what? Don't forget the Native Americans. Don't forget the people that were on this land before any of the rest of us were. I loved that. That was amazing. That was outstanding. And again, just sets up, goes into what happens when black people, when brown people are allowed to showcase, to write these fantastical films. This is what black science fiction and fantasy can do. These are levels of depth and interpretation and thematic storytelling that you will get from storytellers like this, right? And Ryan Coogler for sure here, Misha Green with Lovecraft Country. This is what we're talking about. This is what we can do. This is what can be showcased. And man, just I cannot speak to. I tell you, there's so many layers. There are essays that can be written, hopefully will be written about everything, all the depth and all the different, like, all the layers that Coogler put into this story and into the development of these characters. Just unbelievable job, just absolutely outstanding, and all the more reason why this is most certainly to this point his magnum opus for sure. So I've used the word flawless twice to describe a couple of aspects of this film. I didn't mention it for the writing, although I could say it for that, but it definitely can extend to the visuals. And this is one of those cases where, because those of us, we watch a lot of the CGI fests, and the comic book movies. Black Panther, a great example. We've talked about how with Black Panther, the third act of that movie, the visual effects kind of fall off a truck. Unfortunately, because of rush production, they didn't have as much time as they should have had, like as much time as Shang-Chi got, right? They should have gotten more time to be able to refine those visuals. But here, with respect to, and I think more time was given to Sinners for like post-production, if I'm not mistaken, if I read that correctly earlier, like, I don't see visual flaws in this film whatsoever. I mean, everything that is represented here with respect to any of the creature effects for the vampires, the makeup, and certainly, when it comes to the whole idea of Michael B. Jordan playing two different versions of himself, it's like, okay, I can go through this movie. It's like, okay, where are the seams, right? Like, where's the split scene? Like, where is it clearly, where are the shadows different? Like, where's the lighting a little bit off? Like, how is this going? And it's like, I couldn't see it. I couldn't find it. And I, I'll look for it, obviously, like, if I go see this again in theaters, or, when we get the home release, but I couldn't see it. To me, it's like, wow, this is some of the most flawless double work I have seen. And I mean, we've come a long way, obviously. We've come a long way since, the days of the Patty Duke show, and, whenever you do a duplicate in an old series back in the 60s and 70s, and even into the 80s and 90s, and even into the early 2000s, right? Like, obviously, at this point in 2025, the technology is there, and Michael B. Jordan even talked about like the different camera rigs and some of the other like mocap stuff that they had to do in order to really make it as seamless as it was. And it looks seamless. It really does. It looks flawless. Visually speaking, and somebody mentioned that there is a warmth to this film and a genuine nature to this film that exists because it was shot on film stock. And you know what? I'll buy that because, you know, I'm not anti film. I've never been anti film. The problem that I've always had with respect to the film versus digital argument is I don't like when people gatekeep films that are made on digital. And Coogler has done both. Coogler has made films on digital and he's made stuff on film. Now, his decision to make this on film, I haven't read exactly, where that choice came from, but, just as an outside observer, I could see it like, okay, this is a period piece. This is something in the Jim Crow era. You want it to have kind of a grainier look. I understand that. And it does serve this film well in terms of contrast and in terms of, the different earth tones and the colors that you get from this. Yeah, I get that. I do get that. He wanted it to look more genuine. He wanted it to look less fake because of when it took place, because of what it was doing. I get that. I understand that. And that as long as he, I don't feel like Ryan Coogler is somebody that gatekeeps digital versus film because he's worked with both, right? You can do digital with Black Panther and Wakanda Forever because that's the MCU, that's futuristic, that's now, right? That's a not too distant future, right? You're dealing with Wakandan tech and flying ships and suits and nanotech and all that stuff, right? That's fine. It works great for something like that. But for something like this, where you want it to be grittier, you want it to have more of a warmth in that regard. You need it to look more lived in that regard. I totally get why you would use film stock. I totally understand that. And again, not against it. It absolutely lends itself to the visual language of this film extremely well. And I think that was a very wise choice, visually speaking. And yeah, I really don't see for all of the visual effects stuff that this film does do, and there's quite a bit that it does, right? From start to finish. I absolutely nailed it. I would again consider this aspect of the film to also be flawless, subjectively speaking, of course. And by the way, I also had just before I stop talking about the visuals, I have to comment on, I mean, how that juke joint scene that we're talking about was framed and just the camera movement and just how incredibly rhythmic and free flowing that was and what they did with the camera, what they did with the editing. And this is a perfect time to highlight the DP for Sinners, Autumn Durald Arkapaw, who was not the DP on Black Panther, but was the DP on Black Panther Wakanda Forever. But it is also important to note that Ryan Coogler, throughout all of his feature films, has had nothing but female directors of photography. And I love that. That is another, just another one of those representation matters moments, even within the crew, right? And also visually speaking, who was the costume designer for this movie? Again, Ruth Carter, a legend, an absolute legend in costume design, going all the way back to the Spike Lee days, right? So there's a lot there with respect to the visual style of this film. And also even, Michael P. Shaver and how he edited this film, just really well done visually. Again, like I said, flawless. Visually, absolutely flawless. I should have known from the beginning who was going to score this movie, but even when I saw his name in the credits, I was just like, figures, right? But of course, Ludwig, Ludwig Göransson. I mean, come on. The man literally won an Oscar for his work on Black Panther, and it was deservedly so because what he did, I mean, it's still to this day one of the most vibrant scores in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and he's only just built his career off of that. I mean, after that, what'd he do? Oh, nothing, just the theme for The Mandalorian that everybody remembers, right? He's also now scored a Christopher Nolan film because he scored Oppenheimer, right? And now here he is lending his talents to emphasizing the fantastical nature of this particular film. And one of the other things that he does, obviously with respect to the blend of musical styles that we hear in this film, right? And it starts with Delta Blues, right? It starts with that particular blueprint, but it also extends, and there are times in this movie where we hear different black music, where we hear different music culturally from different eras, and that's the whole point, is this is all one. The healing quality of music is all one in the same, and it's all part of the same yearning for freedom. And Ludwig just, I mean, he and Coogler just have an understanding, right? And what we're seeing, I think, is, kind of a similar relation like, Steven Spielberg and John Williams, or, Tim Burton and Danny Elfman. And obviously, different types of filmmaking in that regard than what we're seeing here. But it is definitely an understanding that those two have, where Coogler's got a vision, Coogler knows what he wants to do with the story, and Göransson absolutely understands how to make it sound and how to make it vibrant and how to bring that out, how to bring it to life on, in the canvas, right? Because listen, I we all know how important sound is. We all know how important music is. And when you get a composer and a filmmaker that are on the same page, it's breathtaking. It's harmonious, and it fits so incredibly well that you don't even realize it, right? The tension is being heightened and your emotions are being stoked in the direction that they're meant to be stoked, because what you're hearing is just as important as what you're seeing, and they serve each other. This is a very vibrant film. This is a very loud film at times. It's a very powerful film, auditorily, in addition to visually, and with respect to what is being said, with respect to what is being shown, and with respect to what is being heard, no doubt. And it's perfect choice. I mean, there would be no other composer I would think to pair with Ryan Coogler at this point in time than Ludwig Göransson. And I am really happy for him because I've been a fan of his career, ever since the impeccable score he did for Black Panther when I found out what he did and when I heard, and again, one of the most vibrant scores in that entire franchise, in all 35 movies of that franchise. And he has one of the most vibrant themes and one of the most vibrant pieces of music, and the incorporation of different cultures into it. Like, he's somebody that understands that blend. And again, to just be on that same page with Coogler as far as what he does here, and just in terms of the filmmaking itself, is just it's priceless. It's utterly priceless, and a joy to behold and hear and listen to, in addition to what we're seeing on screen. And that is most evident during the juke joint scene, and also the juke joint sequence, really, and also in any of the blues scenes that Sammy is singing and playing the guitar with, and the Irish jig scene, even, right? Like, even that part of it, like those parts, they really resonate, and they really, vibrate strongly with the soul of this film, the soul of this story, and, hits you on a number of different emotional levels. It's a fantastic balance. And again, dare I say it again, yes I will, flawless. Utterly flawless. I mean, seriously, my final thoughts with respect to Sinners is that it really is a flawless movie, and I'm sure that, like, I can, upon rewatches, and I'm sure people, especially when it gets on home video, they'll start picking it apart and they'll talk about, well, this was wrong and this was wrong, and I saw a flaw here and I saw a flaw there. It's like when you make a statement that something is flawless, people cannot wait to prove you wrong, and that just, really says more about how pathetic they are than about how, misguided you might be, right? Because it's all subjective. And for me, from my perspective, culturally speaking, and definitely with respect to, like I said, just really appreciating the idea of black fantasy, black science fiction in that regard. Like a story like that being told, and a horror movie with this level of substance and depth, not only in the storytelling, but in the character development and whatnot. I mean, this is a tour de force. This is absolutely fantastic. Outstanding piece of work by Ryan Coogler, Michael B. Jordan, Haley Steinfeld, Wunmi Masaku, Delroy Lindo, uh, everybody else involved, Miles Caton. Like, it just, everyone involved in this film deserves all manner of praise and aces for what they did. An outstanding job, and you can tell that everyone brought their A game. Everyone was absolutely on point from start to finish with this entire film, from Ryan Coogler's direction and writing, all the way through to, the DP work, the editing, everybody, the cast and crew, like this is prime filmmaking, right? This is what we talk about in terms of, this film should be heralded as what original filmmaking is actually capable of when it does have that big budget behind it, when the studios actually do support and greenlight something like this. This is what we can get, not just from black cinema, but from original cinema in general, right? And hopefully that is a message that does resonate. Hopefully that this film continues to do well. It took in 4.7 million on the Thursday previews. It took in another, I think, 20 plus million, something like that, on Fridays. It beat out Minecraft, if I'm not mistaken, at least for Friday. And I know Minecraft's been out for the last couple of weeks, but that's just been selling like gangbusters so far in the theater. And this is like, the first big test. What will Sinners do against that? And I've commented on threads about this whole 185 million to break even number, and I feel like in some ways that's like Warner Brothers gaslighting, because I've never been a big proponent of, well, it's got to be 2.5 times its budget. It's like all these arbitrary numbers, and All it takes is somebody at the studio to go, nah, we're not going to do another one. Or, nah, I think we'll do another one. That type of deal. It's so arbitrary, right? And that 185 million number came out of a Variety piece that was talking about how original filmmaking has been a bad bet for Hollywood so far this year. And it was also a piece that was being critical of Michael DeLuca and Pam Abdy, because word is that they're on the outs and not in good graces with Warner Brothers Discovery at this point in time. So I'm very reluctant to trust a number like that. That being said, I do hope that Sinners does well. Hope it does financially well so that, it eliminates most of the excuses that the studio could give to, green lighting anything else connected to it, right? Because certainly if this is the intent, if they are going to make a franchise out of this, then certainly Coogler could continue that. And we're also not talking a whole lot more. Some people are talking about the historic nature of the deal where he gets the original rights to this film back in 25 years. And there are studio executives that are not happy that Warner Brothers gave him that deal because that's insane. That's considered insane. The idea of the rights going back to the filmmaker, especially in this case, a black filmmaker, right? He's going to get the rights back to this movie and whatever comes out of it in 25 years. That's insane. Ryan Coogler is younger than me, right? He's around the same age as Michael B. Jordan, 38, 39, somewhere around that, right? So you're talking 25 years. I mean, come on, look how old Scorsese is. Look how old Spielberg is. They're still making movies, right? So if Coogler is going to have a long and fruitful career, I mean, this could pay off very well for him, especially if like any spinoffs occur, if they do decide to continue this forward, and they most certainly could. The mid credit and it's weird because it's a mid credit scene in this movie, but it's not really a mid credit. It's really the end of the movie because what you find out is that uh, Sammy has grown up and like he was allowed like basically Smoke or had made a deal with Stack. He says, "I won't kill you, but you gotta let Sammy live his full life," right? So the ones that escape, the vampires that escape all of this are Stack and Mary. And on one hand, I was happy with that because it's like, all right, well, they wanted to be together and they've lived long enough, in secret or whatever. They've been through it so that they can actually be together, right? So that story actually did find its way through that, right? And because they're vampires, they're eternal. So what happens? Sammy gets older. He's still got the scar from what happened that night on his face. But they got legendary blues musician Buddy Guy to play the older version of him, and that's when Stack and Mary visit him at the club. And of course, this is in 1992, and somebody did point this out, and I didn't realize this either. This is another one of the many layers of this movie that apparently the time of when this occurred, it was right before the LA riots, right before what happened post the Rodney King verdict, right? So it was another flashpoint in time with respect to black history and black culture in America. Right when they go meet up with him, and he tells them about the deal that he made with Smoke before he died to keep him alive for the entirety of his life, let him live his full life, and he offers him the immortality. I can make it. You don't have a whole lot long left, but I can make it so that you keep on going. And that's when Sammy says, "I think I've had enough of this world," truthfully. And being a blues musician and going through that's just another testament to black history and the cultural perspective, because he got to live his life out of the Jim Crow era, and he lived through the civil rights movement, and he lived through all of the different, he's about to experience Rodney King, right? Because this is in the 90s, right? When this happens, and you see how they had Stack and Mary dressed at that point, culture, like very like time specific for that point in time, and that's really the end of the movie. And again, it's just another highlight of black culture and living through it and how it goes for these characters, how it goes for a lot of black people, historically speaking, generationally speaking, in that regard. And that's the real end of the movie, even though it's technically a mid-credit scene because the credits start rolling a little bit before that. And then, of course, there is an end credit scene, which is really just a musical performance. But that is a point that I do want to bring up because I did have an experience. I was leaving my theater, and I posted this on Threads as well, but I'll tell the story here as well. I was leaving the theater, and, I'm at the bottom of the stairs, right? And I'm about to walk down the hall, and then that's when the, end credit performance comes up. And it's just Sammy singing a song, singing a tune on his guitar. And there was a white man wearing a Detroit Lions shirt, who had been in the theater and he had left. But when he heard the end credit scene, he came back in the theater and he stood behind me, watched the scene, and when it was over, he turned to me and he said, "That was one of the best horror movies I've ever seen." And he said that he, it had a real message. Because I told him, I was like, I like horror movies that, isn't just an hour and a half of gore and jump scares and whatnot. And he's like, "Oh yeah, there's a real message. You can tell there was a real message with this film." And he says, "I tell you what, there should be Oscar consideration for this." And I was like, I don't know. The Oscars don't necessarily recognize horror and whatnot like that. And he's like, "Yeah, but this film, this film really deserves it." And I was like, "Hey, I am not disagreeing with you one bit whatsoever." And then I went off to the bathroom after that. But yeah, that, to me, that was really telling, because again, I've talked about how this film really will hit black audiences very differently, perspective wise and culturally speaking, as opposed to anybody else, white or otherwise. And to hear a white man say that, and this guy, I assume he was older than me. I really don't know. But just to hear him say that, to hear him, praise the film the way that he did and talk about how it's one of the best horror films he's ever seen. And I don't know this guy. This is a random dude that was in the theater. But one of the best horror films he's ever seen. He enjoyed the message, appreciated the message, and thinks it's Oscar worthy, right? And who knows? I mean, we're talking about what is this, an April release? I mean, it's got to survive all the way into awards season, way back, all the way in November, December, in order for awards consideration. And maybe it will. We have seen some exceptions with respect to that. Some films that have been released not in award season that have lasted all the way to award season and have picked up some awards as a result of that. Who knows? I mean, I certainly hope so. I mean, that would be great if we're talking about awards consideration for something like Sinners, but, I'm not holding my breath on it. But either way, that was really awesome. That was an awesome moment, and just one of those moments where, when you might have lost faith in humanity, something like that happens and just kind of restores it just a little bit. Just reminds you that there's still some people out there that get it, some people out there that understand the situation, understand the message, and can appreciate great cinema with a message like this one. This is a 10 out of 10. This is fully deserving of its A cinema score. This is an absolutely phenomenal film. It's the best film that I've seen from Ryan Coogler to this point. And I suspect, even though I will I'll appreciate Fruitvale Station, I still feel like I will still consider this his best film, and I will consider it, my favorite of his films so far. So now I'm just deciding on whether or not I'm going to see it again at the theater, or, how soon will I see it at home? Because like I said, I got that 4K Steelbook pre-ordered. I don't know when the release date is, but it will be part of the library as soon as it is released, most deservingly so. And then we'll just see how well it does and what Warner Brothers decides to do with it, if they decide to franchise it or they decide to make anything more out of this world that he has crafted so eloquently and so judiciously and so delicately, if you will, with this particular film. So, hey, kudos to Ryan Coogler, kudos to Michael B. Jordan and everybody else involved. Absolutely phenomenal job. Sinners is right now the best film of the year, without doubt. The best film of the year so far, just about 4 months or so in. And so that is going to do it for this spoiler-filled review of Sinners here on Flight Review. Thank you so much for listening to the show. Thank you so much for supporting the Flightcast. Hopefully, if you've seen the movie already before you listened to this particular episode, I really hope that is the case. Or maybe you really just don't care about spoilers and you're still going to go see it. Hopefully, one way or another, I hope that if you've listened to this, you either have seen the movie or you are still planning to see it. If you want to talk about it, if you want to have a discussion about Sinners on Friday Flight, the next episode, and you want to send in that feedback with respect to this film or anything else with respect to movies, TV, and all the assorted media, you know where to find me on Threads and Instagram at The Flightcast, on BLUESKY at Flightcast. You can also comment under the YouTube posting for this particular episode on the Flightcast YouTube channel. There's also the Flightcast Facebook page, and of course, I can be reached by email at ray@theflightcast.com. All right, take care, stay safe out there, and I will see you all next time. Take it easy.